Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the last session of the day, and this session brings to you two amazing CEOs who will debate on after survival, the rebuild, business leadership in 2021 and beyond. The sweeping disruption of the past year has sapped most enterprises and tested India's business leadership. Let's ask some of the most successful CEOs as to how they and Indian business leaders are dealing with the challenge of disruption and rebuilding their organization for success in 2021 and beyond. I'm delighted to welcome on the virtual dais Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar, immediate past President AIMA and Chairman and Managing Director Kirloskar Brothers Limited, Mr. TV Narendran, CEO and Managing Director Tata Steel Limited, Mr. Sanjiv Puri, Chairman and Managing Director ITC Limited, and Ms. Nayantara, Chief of Delhi Bureau ET Now, who will moderate the session. With these words, may I now request Mr. Kirloskar to introduce the session and welcome our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rekha. Mr. TV Narendran, CEO and Managing Director, Tata Steel Limited, Mr. Sanjiv Puri, Chairman and Managing Director, ITC Limited, Ms. Nayantara Rai, Chief of Delhi Bureau, ET Now, ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to all for a relevant session in today's day and age on business leadership in 2021. We're privileged to have a panel of two distinguished leaders to discuss the immediate issue of recovering from the COVID shock and rebuilding for the future. Mr. Narendran, thank you for joining this panel. As a professional in the steel industry and the Tata Group, you've seen many transformations of business and economy over the past 3 decades. You've played a key role in the globalization of Tata Steel at the time the world became flat, and companies needed to build global capacities and competencies to survive. During the past year, you've dealt with the severe disruption of supply chain in your industry. It would be great to hear from you on how you have overcome this disruption to reconfigure your company for growth in the future. Thank you for joining us and a warm welcome to you. Puri, it's a pleasure to have you, I think for the first time on the AIMA platform. As a key player in ITC's transformation from a tobacco company into an FMCG giant, and a driver of ITC's foray into technology, you know what it takes to lead an overhaul. The past year has been both a challenge and a boon for the FMCG companies as lockdowns disrupted production and distribution, but concentrated consumption at home. Your company has restructured its product portfolios and reinvented its operations. We would like you to tell us how emergency measures taken during this pandemic can be translated into a comprehensive business transformation. Thank you for joining us and a warm welcome to you too. We're also delighted to have Ms. Nayantara Rai from ET Now. Ms. Rai, thank you for agreeing to moderate this discussion with these titans of Indian industry. A warm welcome to you as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a rough year for business leaders, and the new financial year promises to continue in the same manner. Keeping operations going despite revenue and liquidity challenges has tested most leaders. Some have done better than others, but even they have had to contend with continuing uncertainty. All have steered their organizations through fresh waves of COVID, random bouts of restrictions, swings in domestic and foreign policies, volatility in financial and commodity markets, and radical technology shifts. It's hard to settle on any assumptions to make even medium-term decisions, what with the new wave of COVID-19 that's bringing on a fresh set of lockdowns. Under the current circumstances, business leaders can only build organizational capabilities for greater flexibility and resilience. They need to invest in technology and skills to ensure business continuity under all conditions. They need to reorganize supply chains and distribution. They may also share risks and rewards by forging complementary partnerships. Importantly, in an extremely uncertain environment, business leaders must offer reliability. We are privileged to have two distinguished leaders from key sectors of the economy, and we can look forward to an exciting discussion. It's now my pleasure to invite Ms. Rai to take over and conduct this session. Thank you. Over to you, Nayantara.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining in. This is indeed a special conversation we're going to have with two titans of India Inc. Between them, they're responsible for direct and indirect employment of millions of people. There is still a lot of uncertainty. Thank you so much, Mr. TV Narendran and Mr. Sanjiv Puri, for agreeing to this conversation. We're supposed to be talking about leadership lessons learned in 2020 that we can carry forth in 2021. Mr. Puri, if I can begin with you. ITC directly employs 30,000 people. Indirectly, you're responsible for 6 million livelihoods. That's the number of people that rely on ITC for employment. Mr. Puri, I don't even want to know how 2020 was for you, but exactly a year later, we're pretty much where we were 365 days ago, but we have experience on our side. Given the kind of uncertainty, the raging pandemic, the second wave, which is looking far worse than the first wave, Mr. Puri, how do you draw strength every day to be the top boss of ITC? And if I could get your opening comments on how you're going to steer the company out of this crisis.
Thank you, Nayantara. So I believe the pandemic last year was unexpected. I think many of us were caught off guard and we had to respond on our feet. But I think there are tremendous lessons that all of us have got last year. And those lessons, of course, are going to come in good stead as we go forward. And if I reflect on what we learned last time and how this would steer us through, I think some of the most important lessons have first to do with people. I think as soon as this pandemic unfolded, the most important area that we gave attention to was how to comfort people, how to reach out to people with compassion and empathy, how to settle the anxieties, because ultimately it's the employees who will take care of the enterprise. So that was one. And as a large enterprise, and you alluded to our ecosystem where there are a lot more people dependent on our value chain. So we felt it is our own responsibility to reach out to the ecosystem in order that we could help them and support them in getting up their supply chains, their operations, and equally with the community, because they were people who needed help. They were people who were under distress. So that was the first step that we took. And having gone through that step, I think then it was time to now think about the future. How do we reboot? How do we survive? And how do we thrive in the future? And again, the first step was aligning and inspiring employees, getting them all aligned and getting all of them to understand and get the morale up so that we could deal with the challenges that lied ahead. As an organization, see, we are organized in a fashion that we believe gives us tremendous amount of agility. We have distributed manufacturing. Our supply chains actually deal with just in case. It's not designed for just in time, and that was deliberately so. And we have a distributed leadership. We have fair degree of empowerment, of course, with accountability. But when the pandemic unfolded, supply chains were disrupted. If you look at the market, there was demand destruction in certain sectors. And then there were sectors where there was a certain surge in requirements. For example, there was panic pantry loading, and also consumer consumption patterns shifted because out-of-home consumption stopped. So there was a surge. And then because of the hygiene issues, the hygiene and personal safety issues, there were new segments that were emerging. And there was a crying need in society to deal with all of this. So there was a lot to be done. And we realized that despite having an architecture that we thought was agile enough and resilient enough, we realized that we needed to do something more, because the amount of agility that is required at that point of time, we would not be able to deliver in the conventional way of working. So we pivoted the organization structure. We pivoted it into cross-functional teams to deal with the specific issues at hand. So there were people dealing with supply chain, how to get supply chain going, how to deal with surge. There were people dealing with innovation, sensing out consumer requirements, and how do we craft out new value propositions and take them to the market. There were people dealing with COVID protocols. because for example, the EHS team became the COVID protocols team. And very important, again, there had to be constant engagement with people to keep the morale high, because as the pandemic unfolds, a lot will change. So there was a team that was looking at employees. So we kind of pivoted the organization and directed them at these specific areas so that decision making is faster. And we are quite happy with the results that we received. In about 10 days time, we had about 180 manufacturing locations up and running. We orchestrated interesting partnerships, very unusual partnerships to reach out to the customer and to the consumer, because the conventional distribution was disrupted. We redesigned distribution. During the year, we brought out about 100 products into the market. In fact, 50 within the first quarter itself, because as the pandemic unfolded, consumers wanted a lot of hand wash, they wanted sanitizers, and that kind of capacity was not existing in India. So in fact, sanitizer capacity, we multiplied 275 times. We repurposed perfume lines into sanitizer lines. And that also with a lot of it with directions given remotely. And then we brought out, disinfectant sprays, fabric disinfectant sprays. So as the needs of the consumer evolved from personal requirements to surface disinfectants, to fabric disinfectants, to out-of-home safety. So Savlon kind of traversed the journey with them and brought out products. And they were churned out and put into the market in a matter of weeks. So in a way, redefined paradigm of product development and consumer insight. The other, I think, the facet that came very, very useful, and it's been, we've always been very focused on digital. We have invested in digital, but I think the pandemic opened our eyes to what we can achieve through digital and what role digital can play. And what does not happen in decades actually happened in weeks. And I'll give you a very interesting anecdote. We work with about 1.5 million farmers in the 27 aspirational districts to educate them on best agronomy practices. So when the lockdown happened, the question was, what do we do with this program? And that is, those are actually the people that need the most attention at the difficult period. So we actually pivoted again, and all the interfaces were changed to apps, video conferencing, WhatsApp, and the results were amazing. Whatever norms and objectives had been set for incomes increase were actually achieved when we measured them after the lockdown was there. So that's just the the power of digital. I'm just illustrating that to demonstrate how much as a society we have been able to do through digital and how much digital can do for us. So these are some of the I think important lessons for us, and I believe these lessons are important. The same lessons will help us go forward. We certainly need to be agile. We certainly need to be very cognizant of the requirements of our people, right. And not only our people in the ecosystem, and correct. Do whatever is required to be with compassion and empathy. And we are, of course, I would say all of us are much better prepared. We've been through it once, but I do understand that this time it's a much higher level of infection. And to me, the most important point to emphasize at this point to everybody, and we are saying this in the company, is the COVID appropriate behavior. Take all the safety measures, the masks, the hand washing, the sanitization, social distancing. And we are actually telling all the employees, like we did last time, that not only within the company, all of you take the responsibility to educate people in your social circles and in our business ecosystems. So that's one area that's going to receive very sharp thrust at the moment.
Okay, so you set the stage, and I'm going to use that now to go across to Mr. Narendran. Mr. Narendran, of course, you have experience on your side. We've just heard ITC Chairman, Mr. Sanjiv Puri, talking about the need to be agile, how he became agile, the organization became agile. My question to you is that exactly a year ago, at least you knew there was a lockdown. Today, when the second wave is raging, we don't know which way it's going to go. I'm reminded once again of the Prime Minister's statement, "Jaan hai to jahan hai." Given this kind of uncertainty, how are CEOs like yourselves supposed to be agile, not knowing what tomorrow is going to happen? Is it going to be a mini containment zone? Will there be a weekend curfew?
No, thanks, Nayantara. I think it's important for organizations to build resilience, and that's what all organizations do. Agility is something that has been more recent in something that we've been trying to build, and most organizations have been trying to build agility into the way they work over the last few years. And crises like this, give us an opportunity to test ourselves on whether we are agile enough, right? So I think what has happened since last year and why we think we are slightly better prepared this year than last year is last year when the lockdown happened, yes, we knew there was a lockdown, but we did not know it would be so complete, right? So I think for organizations like us with long supply chains, which extend across countries, across the country and across countries, it was very challenging at very short notice to make sure that all the consumables, critical consumables that are required to keep a steel plant running, keep coming in, right? This year, we are obviously better prepared, right? So even when the signals of the COVID case, whether the COVID cases are going up, we started looking at the supply chain, we started looking at our vulnerabilities, we started looking at what are the critical consumables which we have and which we don't have. And in case there is a lockdown, what are the markets that we can export to, so on and so forth. So I think the team, because of what it's gone through last year, is in a better position to explore the multiple options that may be available. And second thing is, last year when we went into the lockdown, we didn't know how the world economy would do, right? China was in pretty bad shape. The rest of the world was pretty much shutting down. Whereas this year, you're seeing a very strong and resurgent China as far as the economy is concerned. And you are seeing the US in a much healthier shape than it was last year. Also, all the governments, whether it's the EU, the US, China, including India, is spending a lot of money to restart economies. So I think macroeconomically, we are in a better place globally and in India. So I think our preparedness is also better. We certainly don't want a lockdown, but I think if it happens, I think we are better prepared than we were last year to respond to it.
Mr. Puri, part of being a good leader is also to see short-term versus long-term. We just heard Mr. Narendran saying we don't want a lockdown, but we are prepared for it. Short-term, long-term, where does industry stand? Jaan hai to jahan hai. What is the industry in favor of during this second wave?
See, the strategy that is being followed right now, of course, we don't know whether there will be a complete lockdown, is right now more targeted at areas where there are problems and certain restrictions. That's the strategy that is being targeted at. No doubt that this surge is very concerning, but we have to also, it's a very difficult decision because we have to balance out the whole challenge of lives and livelihoods. I do understand it's a very difficult situation, a challenging situation, because there are many people in the informal sector, small and medium enterprises, who get disproportionately impacted. And globally also, what is being said is that about another 200 million will get added to the unemployment kitty in the world. Which was already at about 800 million prior to the pandemic. So we are talking about 1 billion people over time. So that is an issue that also needs to be cognized for. So a strategy that is able to sharp target and create containment zones in places which are hotspots, put restriction on activities that are causing or are identified to be the cause of large scale spreading. I think that would be a better strategy. But if the situation so demands and there is a need to have a much sharper lockdown, then I think as Naren said, I think the industry is better prepared to deal with that situation. But it is something that is evolving, and I think as it evolves, decisions will have to be made on whether it needs to be at a micro level or at a much larger level.
And ladies and gentlemen, keep sending in your questions and answers. The audience is sending them. And in fact, Mr. Puri, I do have one of them, and I'll take it for you right now because it's in continuation of what we were talking about. How prepared are you for multiple waves of COVID and lockdowns? You were just talking about this seems to be the strategy which might make more sense and more appropriate where we are at the moment, but it impacts supply, it impacts production, all of that. Are you already prepared?
Yes, I think as I said earlier, the lessons of the earlier year are very useful, and we have taken those on board. These are lessons that we have hardwired into the organization. Our processes and our planning has accordingly been modified to deal with this situation, so that we can respond to this situation as it evolves in a very agile fashion. So the lessons we have learned earlier are what is going to help us in the future. We are better prepared to deal with our supply chains. Our vendors, our ecosystem is better prepared. Inventories have been built up in anticipation of potential disruptions. We have our innovation teams working the same way as they did in the earlier years, listening to the voice of consumer and trying to identify what new trends or what new needs are emerging, and does it fit our capability to be able to meet the consumer need that is emerging. So all this is well in place, and therefore that's why I believe that we are well prepared to deal with it as we go forward.
Okay. Mr. Narendran, if I can come to you now, you made a very pertinent point that the global economy was very different than what it is looking like now. The recovery you're seeing in the US, the massive liquidity, which has also led to appreciation of all asset classes, the massive comeback of China, all of that. At the same time, we also had maybe one of the best union budgets in India in over a decade. Economists will perhaps have to go back and rework all of their projections, but given the strong macros, what does this mean for Tata Steel?
See, we are obviously very closely linked to macroeconomic activity. Steel industry is very closely linked to that. So we seem to be in a good place because, like I said, globally, there's a lot of spend on infrastructure, whether it's the US, whether it's China, and most importantly, India. India has traditionally had consumption-led growth, and we are probably starting to see the beginning of a decade of investment-led growth. And investment-led growth is more steel-intensive than consumption-led growth. So that's one thing which is happening. The second thing which is happening is that China has realized that if it has to come closer to becoming carbon neutral by 2060, which is the goal that they've declared, they need to really revisit whether they need to export steel, because steel is one of those hard to abate sectors. So China is really wondering, should it be exporting steel, which leaves a carbon footprint behind in China, import iron ore and export steel and leave a carbon footprint behind. So there are moves in China to discourage exports, which is good for the steel industry globally, because that used to be the problem for most of the last decade. The third thing which is happening is, if you look at Europe, carbon costs are already creeping up. The cost of carbon is about 43 euros a ton now, and that is having an impact on the cost of making steel in Europe. So there are multiple factors which are not only helping the demand side of steel, but also changing the cost structure for steel manufacturing in big steel producing regions like China and Europe. All this augurs well, I think, for the steel industry. In some sense, I think there'll be more stability, more consumption or more investment-led growth, better discipline in the marketplace, which is good for the Indian steel industry, because all of us are then ready to invest, to expand, to grow.
And what a time to expand, right? When you're seeing the sovereigns pump prime the economy and the super cycle of the commodities, the steel prices I'm talking about, Mr. Narendran.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think we should not get overexcited by the steel prices of today, but really look at, do we expect steel prices over the next decade to be higher than the steel prices over the last decade? And I do believe steel prices over the next decade will be higher than what it was in the last decade. May not be at today's level, but it certainly, things point towards it being higher than it was in the last decade, which is good because that should trigger private sector investment in India and the steel industry. And India has been struggling for private sector investment, and I think steel industry can lead the way over the next few years.
So you expect these kind of prices to remain for some time? This will not mute demand?
Not today's prices, but certainly prices higher than it was for the last few years. Today's prices are abnormally high. I concede that.
Mr. Puri, that's a cycle you also have to deal with, the super cycle of commodities. And you talked about doing business with compassion. there are two aspects of it. As a leader, you have to lead with compassion when it comes to employees, but you also have to lead with compassion when it comes to your consumers. You're supposed to be obsessed with your bottom line. You're supposed to be rewarding your shareholders, all of that. But these are uncertain times. How do you manage all of this?
Well, we have always believed that whatever inflation happens, we should first of all look at ways of dealing with it through internal efficiencies and trying to look at all the actions that can mitigate the impact. And only as a last resort do we actually raise prices. And in the current situation, definitely it calls for even more caution when you are dealing with prices. It does call. So I think it will be a very considered view wherever pricing decisions are taken. The attempt will be to minimize it. The attempt will be to mitigate it through internal efficiencies. But yes, the reality is there are pieces in the commodity cycle where the inflation is quite huge. So one will have to keep a watch on that. That's a very clear monitorable, and therefore what decision we are finally able to take on that front is something we will have to look as we go forward.
Fair point. So you'll try and delay passing on the burden to the consumers until you absolutely have to and test it out. That's the sense I'm getting from you. Mr. Narendran, you're talking about leading with compassion. The Prime Minister has held meetings already about diverting oxygen meant for industrial use, for medical use. Can you share with us Tata Steel's views on this, what Tata Steel is doing at the time of this raging pandemic? Because these are also lessons in leadership.
Absolutely. From a Tata Steel perspective, and if I talk specifically of oxygen, even as we speak, we are today supplying 200 to 300 tons per day of oxygen to hospitals in and around Jamshedpur, certainly, but also in across Jharkhand state, as well as we've started supplies to UP, we started supplies to Bihar, we started supplies to Odisha as well from our plants there, and some of it is going to West Bengal as well. All this is being coordinated centrally, because today the bottleneck is not so much in the oxygen supply as in transportation and delivery of oxygen, because oxygen needs to get transported in cryogenic tankers, and there are only that many tankers available which can transport oxygen. Secondly, the bigger hospitals have oxygen tanks, but the smaller hospitals need oxygen cylinders. So oxygen needs to be supplied to the factories who will bottle it and supply it in cylinders. So the whole supply chain is being tested. The source is production of oxygen, which I think steel plants have in plenty, and I think steel plants are happy to support the government in any which way we can. And like I said, Tata Steel is already doing that in a very big way.
Both you, Mr. Narendran, and Mr. Puri in the past have been talking about the role the private sector can play for the country to fight COVID-19. Mr. Puri, if I can come to you now, what are some of the initiatives that ITC is planning, whether it is a vaccination drive, as we head into, what will be many, many mini lockdowns, if not a full lockdown? Can you share with us?
Well, really, I would say three points here. One, and to my mind, that's the most important, is continued focus on the COVID appropriate behavior, the mask, the social distancing, hand wash, sanitization, not only amongst our employees, amongst everybody who enters our premises, into our ecosystem, reaching out to the communities where we operate and trying to spread the message. So that's and also helping them by making some of these products available to those who are not able to afford it. So that's the first mission. The second activity is really to directly help communities where they are in a problem, where people have maybe like you saw in the earlier lockdown, there were lots of people who had lost, who earn a wage daily, who had lost jobs. So we actually converted all our kitchens in the hotels, all our kitchens into factories, as almost like community kitchens. We would produce it and have somebody deliver it to those who needed it. And also, of course, other packaged food products and hygiene products were distributed. So these are the two areas that we are certainly going to contribute towards. And the third is, of course, besides facilitating vaccination of our own employees, we are also supporting our entire ecosystem for vaccinations. We are, and there are in some pockets we do encounter some hesitancy also. So we are trying to provide them the information, connect them with some doctors who they can speak to and get convinced about it, bring them to certain locations when there are enough number of people at certain locations to be vaccinated, to try and arrange it at the location itself, so that more people can get vaccinated, and the hesitancy also goes away when they see others getting vaccinated. So our own employees and our ecosystem, particularly the partners who come from small and medium enterprises, micro enterprises who work with us, we are assisting them and we are kind of funding their vaccination as well.
I've got another question from the audience, and this is for you, Mr. Narendran. What gives Tata Steel immunity from COVID?
I think none of us have immunity in that sense, but I think the way the team has got together, the employees of the company are obviously very passionate about the organization, and they really got together during this time of crisis. Because one thing you must remember is in Tata Steel, we operate in some of the most remote parts of the country. So we have a responsibility not just to the business, but also to the community. And a lot of the community depend on us for medical care and for many other things. So the response was huge from the employees, and obviously the Tata Group responded as well, and Tata Steel front-ended that response, at least in Jharkhand and Odisha, in a very big way. So a lot has been done. A lot of time has been committed by our team. A lot of money has been spent. We, in some sense, started preparing for the COVID crisis maybe a few weeks before most people in India, because we knew what was happening in Europe by then. And so we had a sense of how big it could be. And so we started buying ventilators and PPE kits maybe sometime end of February. So we were better prepared. But I think our response has built the trust and equity that we have with the community and with the employees. And that's what gives us immunity, if you can call it that.
Okay. Mr. Puri, if I can come to you, I noticed this one phrase that you said, hard wiring of processes. They say it takes about 3 weeks to form a habit. Now, COVID and the resultant behavior should now be a lifelong habit. But when it comes to businesses and hardwiring of processes and productivity and all of that, can you share with us experiences and what the post-corona ITC is going to look like?
Well, see, during the pandemic, there are certainly some important lessons, and certain things have got reinforced. Certain things need to be reset. Now, the world was already facing serious issues of sustainability even before the pandemic. But during the pandemic, what did we see? One is we saw nature heal itself. Second, it accentuated the social fault lines in the society. And that became far more visible to everybody. So there is certainly a big awareness of the issues of sustainability in society today, and rightly so. Second, I think we've seen what digital can do. I think the best of digital is yet to come. So although we are very significantly invested in digital, there's a call for us to reimagine digital and look at how we can craft newer models and how it can power our processes today. And sustainability and digital are two defining trends for the decade. So we've actually started to address both these issues. We have made our aspirations on sustainability bolder. We call it Sustainability 2.0, which we've announced. We have set up some groups within the organization to actually innovate and reimagine digital for the future. So this is an area that is going to be very, very critical going forward. There are lessons on resilience and agility. There are lessons on how much we can achieve in a shorter period of time and in lesser amount of resources. There are very interesting lessons on that. And that is going to reset our own aspiration of benchmarks of how soon we can convert an idea and bring it to the market, or how soon we can reconfigure supply chains, or how soon we can ramp up or ramp down capacity. So it's going to be a reset. Now, within ITC has always believed on this whole principle of responsible competitiveness, which is really taking going beyond just mere shareholder value to societal value creation, embedding the whole social dimension and environmental dimension right into our corporate strategy. So
Right.
we call that responsible competitiveness. Now, based on the lessons that we have learned, I would really now put a agility to it. So it's for us going to be responsible, agile competitiveness. So that feature of agility, I think, is going to get accentuated as a core purpose within our enterprise.
Absolutely. I never thought I would be able to order a dum-cooked biryani on Zomato, but you have, like you said, innovated. You came out with 50 new products in the first quarter itself. You're now opening hotels in the middle of COVID in Chel in Himachal Pradesh. All of that. Mr. Puri, what was the thinking behind that? Because this was also a time when everybody said burn the fat, focus only on the core. ITC did that, but it also showed how resilient it is by taking some of these kind of bets, particularly in the hospitality business.
Yeah, so you have to, you see, it's all about listening to the voice of the consumer, and we did this digitally. We have a consumer command center which we call the sixth sense. So it's about sensing what the consumers are saying, and then asking ourselves whether we have the capabilities and the enterprise strengths to be able to meet that requirement. And as we listened to it, many ideas emerged. There were consumers who were not able to, go out to Dampok or Bukhara, but they still wanted to have a meal. They were all locked into their houses, so they did want to have a change. So then came the out of home, out of hotel gourmet couch and flavors of our kitchens. Similarly, we realized that as the pandemic was ebbing, there was a lot of interest in visiting leisure destinations, particularly. And
right.
All the consumers were looking for known brands, trusted brands, because they wanted to be assured that wherever they are going, the safety protocols would be followed. And that is where the opportunity arose for us to collaborate with people who had their own assets and wanted somebody to bring in the expertise and know-how and the brands behind it. So that's how hotels got launched. And similarly, if we go back to FMCG also, and Savlon, I think, is a very interesting story. It started off with just scaling up capacity of hand washes and sanitizers. And then we saw a lot of consumers were curious to know, how do I disinfect surfaces? There was a requirement to keep doors open, keep the door handles clean, but how do I do it frequently? How do I do it easily? So that's where the Savlon disinfectant spray came in.
Yeah.
Then when winters came, people would go out. People had started to go out by the time, and when you came in, people would want to have their clothes washed and laundered. But that's not possible with woolens. So that's where the whole idea of the fabric disinfectant spray came. Then there was a need for, how do I clean my vegetables and so on and so forth that I'm getting at home. That's how Nim Wash came. So it was all listening to consumers, and because we had also invested in certain platforms within our R&D setup, we could leverage that capability to quickly create new products and bring it to the market. So it's entirely, I would say, consumer driven and being very responsive.
Mr. Narendran, you don't have that much of a consumer interface, obviously, but I want to rely more on your expertise, as far as the macros go. And also, you've been very vociferous about the role the private sector can play when it comes to vaccination. The US Fed chair has very famously now said recovery will remain uneven and incomplete unless there is vaccination for all, not just in the United States of America, but worldwide. When it comes to India, we don't know as yet when vaccination is going to open up, but is industry still of the view that unless you're vaccine for all, we will not have the kind of recovery that has been envisaged, which the economists anyway may have to go back to the drawing board and rework their projections?
I think there are two parts to it, right? I mean, obviously, the sooner you can get everyone vaccinated, the better. That's clear. But let's also be practical, and that's not going to happen overnight. I think all of us have a responsibility as individuals to do the basic stuff, right? Social distancing, wear a mask, wash your hands, etc. And I find a lot of casualness in that across the country, and that makes it worse. when we talk to the government is pretty much saying that there are enough vaccines for everyone over 45. So in the country, if it is the shortage somewhere, it's more a supply chain issue than a fundamental issue, right? So there is one part to it, which is about how do we make sure that everyone who is eligible gets vaccinated? And I think private sector has a very important role to play there. And if you really look at the numbers, there are a lot of people in our organizations who are eligible but have not got vaccinated. So you need to really do a vaccination drive. And manufacturing units like ours have started doing vaccination in the factories once the government has allowed that, right? So there is a driver on that. Secondly, a lot of our workforce is below 45. Right. And so we need to make sure that they follow the protocols. We follow the protocols in the offices and in the factories. They follow the protocols. And that's an obligation all of us have to society. And if we don't do that, there's no point blaming the government and saying we don't have vaccine for all when we are not doing what we are supposed to do. Right. So I think both needs to happen. And obviously, we need to make sure that the supply of vaccine increases. The government has now allowed imports. So this is going to happen, and I think 4 million vaccines a day is not bad at all. Of course, we need 8 million vaccines a day, but very few countries have done 4 million vaccines a day, and that too so fast, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to keep ramping that up, but as citizens, we also need to discharge our responsibilities.
As citizens and as industry, we all need to be responsible. Mr. Sanjiv Puri, with that, I come back to a point that you, for example, made that how ITC tried to become as resilient. And even during the second wave, you've tried to ensure that supply chains remain resilient, that even if there are mini lockdowns, essential FMCG items, food items will reach your consumers. So once again, I touched upon it briefly with Mr. Narendran. Isn't it time the private sector supply chain is also used for vaccination?
Well, I think right now the vaccines are reaching the places where the vaccinations are to be done, and there could be some small gaps here and there sometimes because the reality is that it is a very complex activity, and whatever is getting manufactured is also getting consumed. So it's a complex activity. So right now, I think where private sector can play a role right now is once it has reached the destinations, which are the healthcare facilities, and whether it's government or private, how do we kind of work with them and facilitate vaccination of people so that it happens faster, it happens more seamlessly. So as Naren alluded to, this is what pretty much we are also doing. Wherever we have enough number of people over 45 years of age, we're tying up with the hospitals, getting the people to come into the factories and vaccinate there. So that's what we are doing. However, at any point of time, should when the volumes scale up and there is a greater need for there is a greater complexity in logistics and the private sector can assist that. That is, private sector would be more than willing to assist that. There is no absolutely, when the need is there, we will be more than happy to do it. But at this point of time, as I see, the movement of the vaccines to various places is happening.
Okay.
And one should not expect that it's going to be absolutely perfect because there will be small issues here and there, given the fact that whatever we are producing is also getting vaccinated. There are no inventories, huge amount of inventories lying anywhere that looking at, right? But I think given what we are producing and where it is reaching, I think it's a fairly good system right now.
So as we talk about hardlining of processes, now, Mr. Narendran, I understand that when it comes to Tata Steel's case, at least in the factories, it's going to be very difficult to always have a work from home model. But work from home has become a habit of sorts now for the employees and the employers. How do you see this progressing in hardcore manufacturing companies like yourselves?
Yeah, Nayantara, actually, we started this journey of digitization about 3-4 years back. So we've been investing hugely in digital infrastructure, building capabilities, looking at remote manufacturing. How can you said, how can you have work from home in a factory? You can run a factory from your house if you're, suitably connected in some sense of the term. I mean, not everyone can sit at home and run the factory, but a large number of people who today need to be in the factory don't need to be in the factory, in tomorrow's factories. So sensorization, digitization, having the infrastructure, collecting the data, being more predictive about what you do, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that already happening. For all the people who are working out of office, we've already converted into a work from home, work from anywhere. Many people have opted to work from anywhere. You can be in any other city if your seniors allow that. So we brought in a lot of flexibility. It's more a trust and accountability based culture that we are driving rather than physically being in one place or the other. So we're being location agnostic. Secondly, we used a lot of technology, for instance, to even look at are people social distancing enough. For instance, anybody, any contract worker, any worker who enters a factory has an RFID card. So we would get alerts if we saw people collecting in places more than they needed to. So that helped us stagger the timings in our canteens and do many things. We brought in protocols called pods, where small groups of 4 to 12 people were working in isolated teams so that they couldn't, even if one of them tested positive, you isolated the whole team rather than the whole factory. So there were many such protocols brought into place, which helps us produce the 50,000 tons of steel that we produce every day and the 2.5 million tons of mining that we do every month to continue even during the crisis.
And Mr. Puri, you anyway already said that you noticed productivity with digitization, the work from home models. So that's going to stay in the post-corona world?
Well, it certainly gives us flexibility. I believe that the work from home model worked well during the pandemic because there was enough social equity. There was enough bonding between the teams. And that it is that sense of bonding and social equity that enables you to work efficiently when you are working remotely. So I don't see that we will have a large scale migration to work from home. But yes, it certainly provides some flexibility, some options to have people working from different locations, or on some days or some particular periods for people to work from home. So these options will definitely emerge.
And as they emerge, and I'm not asking this as an employee, but this is a conversation that's been happening. Those that opt for the work from home model, should they be compensated as much as those that are willing to come to work?
Well, we haven't thought of making any differences. We're just thinking of making that as the option available to the employees, right? So not really, anything beyond that. I mean, everything.
Narendran, what about you? You've been experimenting with this model for 3-4 years, yeah. You've been saying.
No, I think work from home was a bit more forced on us, and we think it's a good idea. We will obviously have the flexibility for people to opt for work from home if their jobs allow that. We are not looking at it as cost saving from an employee cost point of view. In fact, in some cases, it may even cost us more. But it's more about how to drive productivity in the offices and of office spaces. Do you really need all the office spaces that you have? Do you really need to subject your employees to, in a city like Bombay, a 4-hour commute every day? And why do you need to do that if they can deliver what they're supposed to deliver from home? So I think it gives us a lot of flexibility to experiment with different models. And we are in the process of doing that. And I'm sure we'll find the right optimal way to not only engage employees, get the best out of them, and get the best for the company.
Okay. Before I wrap up, I've just got a question for you, Mr. Puri, so I've got to take it, which basically is, what can the PLI, the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, do for the Indian food companies that they could not do by themselves?
Well, the quantum of food processing that happens in India is very small. It's in single digits. Now, these PLI scheme is meant to provide impetus to this whole food processing industry so that a larger percentage can be processed, as also provide impetus to exports. Now, if you step back and look at the larger picture, see, India is got the largest arable land in the world. Yet our share of the global exports of agriculture is only 2.5%. Our value add per unit area is also pretty low. The agriculture and food processing industry is an area where there are tailwinds, because globally, as population increases, at some time we will have nearly 10 billion people with better incomes and better nutritional uptakes. So there is a need for greater production. In fact, National Geographic some time back actually said that whatever all the farmers in the world have produced in the last 8,000 years, need to be produced in the next 4 decades. So this is an industry that has got headwinds. And that's why if you look at the reforms and policy interventions that have happened in agriculture, whether they are at FPO level, cluster-based business organization, agri-infrastructure fund, and the market linkages, they are all helping us create a competitive agri-value chain. And the PLI now really fits in there to give impetus to value addition, because we do see an enormous amount of wastages. About 92,000 of agri-produce actually wasted because of inefficiencies. And food processing has huge economic multipliers, best employment to capital ratio. It also will help in improving farmer incomes and reduce the wastages in the agri-value chain. So the benefits are enormous. So I think it's a welcome and good step to provide further impetus to this sector.
We're running out of time, so I'm going to make this the last audience question. Mr. Narendran, this is for you. What does Tata Steel understand by being Atmanirbhar?
I think India is the best place to be Atmanirbhar in steel. There's no other country in the world which is blessed with the geological richness that India has, and also blessed with the large potential market that India has. China has a market, doesn't have the raw materials, at least for steel making. Australia and Brazil have the raw materials but don't have the market. So we are blessed to have both. And if we can't make Atmanirbharta in the steel industry, then we are really messing things up. So I think India has a potential to be, it already is the second largest producer of steel in the world, but we are still 10 to 15% of what China is doing, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity to grow this industry, create jobs in some of the poorest parts of the country, convert the richness below the ground to richness above the ground, and really support the manufacturing industry, which the government is keen on building. And I think in India, it is important to have manufacturing industry come in a big way. I don't think you can jump from agriculture to services without going through a phase where manufacturing plays a big role in creating jobs. And I think that's very important for the country, and the steel industry is, I think, ready to play a role there.
With that, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you both for being so candid, on a busy day like this. Really appreciate it. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to the folks at AIMA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we come to the end of the day's proceedings. Thank you all for being part of the first day of AIMA's 6th National Leadership Conclave. We have another set of very exciting sessions lined up for tomorrow. We shall see you at 3 p.m. Have a pleasant evening ahead and good night.